Finding the standard form of the equation, whenever you see this information, what I want you to think of right away is to draw a graph and then find your center. This is the most important thing that you can do. So as I look at the information and I draw a picture, one of the things I notice is that they tell me right away that my foci are at plus or minus 3, 0. What that means is that as I write down my foci at plus or minus 3, 0, I've already been told indirectly where my center is, because my center is always right in the middle of my foci, which lie along the major axis. So I know that my center is at 0, 0, and I write that down. My center is at 0, 0. Now this is really great news because as I write my equation, I have x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals 1, and that was just from knowing what the center was. And then that foci information for future reference also tells me that my c value is 3. The second piece of information that they give me is where my vertices are. Remember, your vertices lie along your major axis. So I know that my vertices are at plus or minus 5, 0. Or in other words, I have one vertex to the right there and one to the left. This distance right here is a, because it's along your major axis along with your foci, and that distance is 5. And remember, a squared goes along whatever the bigger thing is, or your major axis. Since it's the horizontal distance, 5 squared, or in other words 25, will go underneath your x thing. And the only thing you have left to find, of course, is the number that goes under the y, but we have that special formula c squared equals a squared minus b squared. We know that the c is 3, which means when you square it you get 9. We know that the a is 5, and when you square it you get 25. And we're looking for that b squared thing, which is the thing that will be going underneath the y parentheses. And the only thing that that can be is 16, because 25 minus 16 is 9. So that means 16 will be going underneath the y squared. In number 6, we're going to do the same thing again with information. So the first thing that I do is I graph the information that I have and then try to find the center right away. I know that my foci are at 0 plus or minus 2. So as I write those down, here's one foci, here's the other one. That also tells me, of course, where my center is. I know that if my foci are at 0, 2, and 0, negative 2, that means that my center has to be at 0, 0 again. So my center is at 0, 0, which means I can start off my equation as x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals 1. And then I want to write down that information, of course, that the distance to my foci is called c, and that distance is 2 for future reference. They also tell me in this same problem that I know that the endpoints of my minor axis are at plus or minus 5, 0. Remember, the minor axis is the smaller distance. So these are my co-vertices. If I put those down here, if those are my co-vertices, then this distance is called b. And the b in this case is 5. Notice that that's the horizontal distance, so it's the thing that will go under the x. So 5 squared is 25, and now I already know what goes underneath the x. And those are my co-vertices. And so now all I need is my major axis length, or in other words the a, and then square that kind of thing. I use my formula again with the c squared equals a squared minus b squared. I know that my c was 2, which means c squared is 4. I don't know my a squared, but I know that my b squared was 25, because b was 5. So now I'm looking for my a squared information, which is the thing that will be going underneath the y parentheses. So some number minus 25 is 4, and if I'm finding that information, I know that that means the number that goes underneath the y stuff has to be 29. Because 29 minus 25 is 4. And now I found my equation for number 6. In number 7, same kind of problem, a little bit different presentation. Again, they're giving us information. We're coming up with an equation. The first piece of information that they give me is where my foci are. I notice that my foci are at 0, 0, and 4, 0. So I write those down. So 0, 0 is one foci, 4, 0 is the other. The good thing about that, again, is that I know that my center is directly in the middle of those two things. So my center is going to be at 2, 0. That means I know that my equation is going to be x minus 2 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals 1. I also know that since those are my foci, that distance between the center and one of the foci is 2, and that's my c value. And then they tell me that my major axis has a length of 8. So since my major axis is a length of 8, and I know I'm going in the horizontal direction, that means I have to go 4 units from the center in both directions, because if I have a length of 8, I need 4 to the left, and I also need 4 to the right in order to make a total length along the major axis of 8. And I also know that that is going to be my a value since it's the major axis, and since it's the horizontal distance, that means the number under the x is going to be 16, which is 4 squared. And then, of course, we go back to this formula that we have c squared equals a squared minus b squared. I know that the c was a 2, so that means 2 squared is 4. I know that my a distance was 4, and if I square it, I get 16. And then I'm looking for my b squared. My b squared is what I'm going to be putting underneath the y thing, so 16 minus 12 has to be 4, and that's why 12 is the number that goes under the y squared, parentheses. In number 8, again starting with a picture, I see the information that I have my vertices at plus or minus 4, 0. So I put those on my graph. And the reason that that's kind of important to me is, as usual, I know where my center is now. I know that my center is directly in the middle. Or in other words, I know my center is at 0, 0. I can start off my equation with x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals 1. Since those are the vertices, I know that this distance called a is 4. Or in other words, I also know that that's telling me that the number that goes under my x, since it was in the horizontal direction, is 16. Then they tell me my eccentricity. Now the interesting thing about your eccentricity, of course, if you remember, is that your eccentricity is the same thing as c over a. So since c over a is 1 over 4, what if we looked at what c squared over a squared would be? Well, that would be 1 over 16. Hey, take a look. I notice that this a squared stuff was the 16, which means that c squared is 1. I can use my formula that we've had in the past, the one that goes c squared equals a squared minus b squared, which now I can write as 1 equals 16 minus the b squared. The b squared thing is the thing that you're trying to put underneath the y value. So 16 minus 15 is the only thing that works to give you a 1, and that's why your b squared would have to be 15. And then in our last problem, one more type of problem where we have to draw the graph first. And in this particular graph, I notice that they give me the piece of information about the endpoints of the major axis. What you may not remember is that that means the same thing as these are your vertices. So if I put down 10 and negative 10 here, these are where my vertices are located. So here's one vertex, here's the other vertex. That means that this distance, of course, is a for the 10. It also tells me that my center is at 0, 0, so I write that down so I don't forget my center is at 0, 0. Or in other words, that in my equation I'll have x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equals 1. Since I knew that my a was 10, if I square that, I get 100, and I put that under the x value because it's always in the x direction that the horizontal stuff is occurring. And then the very last thing that they give us is they give us the information about the endpoints of the minor axis, which is indicating that I'm talking about my co-vertices. So if I put my co-vertices on here at -4 and 4, what that means is I know that the distance from here to here is b, which is 4 units, or in other words, 16 has to go underneath my y parentheses.